Bless you and good morning. Welcome to another edition of Make It Plain on WPFW FM Pacifica Radio. And we want to also take the opportunity to let you know right away that this is our December fundraising pledge drive. And we're hoping that you can join us and be a part of it. The goal for Make It Plain on this fine Monday morning of December 15th is $500. Can you help us reach that goal? We invite you, please, ma'am, please, sir, to do so. That would make all the difference in the world. You can make your gift pledge right now, WPFWFM.org, or simply call 1-800-222-9739 to make your pledge. Your contributions don't just keep WPFW on the air, they ensure we can move forward toward tomorrow with all of your support. And it also enables us to continue to have the kind of conversations we're going to have today with our very special guest. How many of you have seen Ken Burns' American Revolution? If you haven't, again, that's public on PBS, just like we're Pacifica, we're public. I encourage you to see it. A lot of great history there. And one of the main characters in it, not a main actor, really not a character, he's a historian, but he's in a documentary now. So, he gets a IMDb thing and all of that. So he's in a major feature, and we're happy to have him because he makes such a great contribution. And I wanted to talk to him about it. He is none other than Dr. Christopher Brown of Columbia University, previously at Rutgers and Johns Hopkins. His research centers on the history of the European experience on the African coast at the height of the Atlantic slave trade, as well as the rise and fall of slavery in the British Empire. So he knows of which he speaks on American Revolution. His courses have been slavery and world history, the Atlantic slave trade, the British Empire, and many, many others. And so we're honored to have Dr. Christopher Brown with us on Make It Plain this morning. Dr. Brown, welcome. How are you?
I'm great. I'm great, Reverend Mark. It's so wonderful to be here and have this conversation with you.
Well, it's important that it be had. Again, folks, we invite you to make your pledges. We'll be calling on you throughout the hour, 800-222-9739 or WPFWFM.org so that you can support WPFW. The American Revolution, Ken Burns has become prolific with these documentaries. We first met when he did jazz and baseball and the Civil War. As a matter of fact, I like to say this to people. Years ago, when he did Jack Johnson, and we know the interest Ken Burns has had in Black history.
Yes.
He was on my show, man, and I said, Ken, what is your interest in Black history? And you know what he said to me? I'll never forget it. He said, Mark, if history is a universe, Black history is the shining sun.
Yeah.
And I never heard a Black person say that. So I was, you know what I'm saying? So it's real. And he did Jackie Robinson. So I want to say something, and let's start here. And I'd love to know if you agree or disagree.
Sure.
I believe his documentary, The American Revolution, of which you're a part, is really significantly, and it's probably the first, if not the only, documentary history that really centers and makes a central part of the history the period of enslavement.
Yeah.
Am I wrong about that?
Yeah, I think that's right. There have been other documentaries that engage the question of slavery, the experience of African Americans in different ways. But I think this is really the first major one that, really centers the Black experience. And just to be clear, that's what America was in the late 18th century. The idea that Black Americans or slavery is somehow peripheral to the 13 colonies, to this era. There's really no way to tell the history of the American Revolution properly without putting, slavery at the center. There is no 13 colonies without slavery. So it's in some ways what Ken Burns is doing is really acknowledging the scholarship that's really developed over the last 50 years, to make clear that black history generally, and the history of slavery, even more broadly, is central to understanding the story of the United States and its founding.
So here's a big question. Is enslavement as significant to the American Revolution as it was to the Civil War?
No. And the reason why I say that is because the Civil War was fought over the issue of slavery. The American Revolution was not fought over the institution of slavery. The institution of slavery was implicated in it and had real consequences for how the war was fought, what was said about it, and how it turned out. But the conflict itself was not principally driven by the future of slavery in North America, which is, obviously what drove the conflict in the
Right.
U.S. Civil War.
But yet its impact was there because you had, and you talked about this in the documentary, you had Britain and Lord Dunmore saying, hey, those of you who are enslaved can come fight for us and win your freedom, right?
That's right. I mean, the British government throughout the conflict, saw the enslavement of peoples of African descent as potentially a strategic opportunity,
Hmm.
because they recognized that the desire to be free, and the willingness to escape slaveholders, which obviously happened long before the American Revolution too, could really undermine the effort of the Continental Army and the individual states trying to attain their independence. And just to be clear, I think I didn't say this at the outset. The British government was not anti-slavery. In Jamaica, in Barbados, in St. Kitts, Antigua, slaveholding was extraordinarily powerful for the British Empire. The British were the principal leading slave traders in the Atlantic world in this period. But they recognized the strategic opportunity of undermining North American independence, by offering liberty selectively to enslaved men and women. So yeah, I mean, it was it became a very big part of the war, especially in the Southern colonies.
So, Christopher Brown with us, folks, of Columbia University. He is one of the historians featured in Ken Burns' new documentary, The American Revolution. So, one of the things you also in the documentary help us understand, and I'm reminded, I was this fall I spoke on the campus of University of Alabama in Tuscaloosa,
Yeah,
and in doing my research, um, we talked about how that area for many years the majority of its population were enslaved people. And we know that to be the case. But what we find out in American Revolution, that was the case in several of the colonies, especially in Virginia. It was at
yeah,
least 40% in Virginia. So
that's right.
can you help us understand just how large of a population we were, even though in bondage?
Yeah. No, so I mean, the story is that there was about a half a million, um, people of African descent, both free and enslaved, in the 13 colonies at the time of the Declaration of Independence, concentrated, in South Carolina and Virginia. South Carolina had a black majority. Virginia's population was almost 50%,
Right.
black. Georgia had a rapidly growing slaveholding, it's a rapidly growing black population. But even New York, the colony, then state of New York, 15 to 20% of the population was black. Pennsylvania, a smaller portion. So there were people of African descent,
Mhm.
um, in all 13 of the original colonies. And not only that, Mark, but there was also slavery was legal in all of these places. We can tend to think about, project backward from later period, the North and the South. The northern colonies, were slaveholding as well at this period of time. So, it was a central part of America,
Yeah.
right up until the time of independence.
Um, And of course, as you said, the Civil War, uh, enslavement was directly responsible, not so much the American Revolution. Yet, um, if I understand this correctly, folks, and this is why this history is very important.
Yeah.
There was a lot going on in the Caribbean.
Yes.
There was even around 1776 major slave revolt being planned in Jamaica,
Absolutely. That's right.
coupled with the fact that the Revolutionary War was affecting Britain's trade in the Caribbean,
Hmm.
which, if I'm not mistaken, also had an effect on those enslaved in Jamaica and the Caribbean, which may have inspired that revolt. Do I have that right?
Yeah. So the British Empire, in what historians like to refer to in this period as the Atlantic world, was an integrated unit. The economies were integrated. And so North America and the British West Indies, Jamaica, Barbados, um, the West African coast where British slave ships voyaged, and the ports in England itself, such as Bristol and Liverpool, as well as London, all of these were part of one economic unit. And so when there was disruption or troubles in one part of it, it
Mhm.
affected all the other parts of it. And so on the 1776 point, the British government, when they decided they had to put down the American rebellion once and for all, and they launched, tens of thousands of soldiers sent into New York City's harbor. They pulled a lot of ships out of the Caribbean. They pulled soldiers out of Jamaica, where they have a major naval base. And as soon as those soldiers and ships left, the enslaved people in Jamaica were like, hey, this is our opportunity, right? The forces have left. The plantation class is distracted. They don't have the same support from the home government that they normally do because they're fighting a war in North America. This is the moment to plan a conspiracy and an uprising. Now, it got discovered before it was able to, before it was able to take full effect. But there are all kinds of spin-off effects of the war in North America that affect, other parts of the British Empire and other parts of the slaving world. I mean, just one other, bit of this. People don't always realize that the British islands like Jamaica and Barbados and Antigua, they tended to rely on food and supplies from North America because they devoted all of their plantation labor and their land to sugar.
Hmm.
So a lot of the food, the horses, the lumber, they came in from places like Philadelphia and Baltimore and Boston and New York City and Newport, Rhode Island. And so when war gets waged in North America, all those sources of supplies that help keep the Caribbean islands profitable and that provide the sustenance for enslaved men and women, all of that gets, severely disrupted. So, one of the sort of spin-off effects of the war in North America is to actually create famine conditions in some parts of the British Caribbean, especially in Barbados, where unfortunately a lot of enslaved Africans end up starving because of the cutoff of trade. So we think about, and it's perfectly understandable. In the United States, we're very focused on the 13 colonies and the beginning of our nation, but North America was part of a much broader whole. That what happened here had ramifications, really severe ramifications in other places.
And wasn't there a fear, historian Christopher Brown with us, folks, wasn't there a fear in this country, in the United States, on the part of the colonists that those enslaved here would be inspired by those enslaved by the Caribbean and later on Haiti, et cetera. And there were, which is another part of history that's kind of written out. We had some revolts here in this country, did we not?
Absolutely, absolutely. I mean, the fear of slave uprisings, the fear of uh, insurgency from within, dates the history of slavery in North America from the very founding colonies, from Virginia in the 17th century and South Carolina in the early 18th century. in New York in the early 18th century. It was the aspect, it's ironic because nobody forces European settlers to enslaved Africans, but it was the aspect of slavery that they worried about most. They didn't worry so much about the morals or the justice or, whether it was Christian. I mean, they came to worry about some of those other things too, but what they really worried about was whether it was sustainable, whether the social costs, whether the cost to, as we would say today, law and order, were justified, were costs that could bear given the prospect of uprisings. And there were uprisings. I mean, most famously in South Carolina, it's known as the Stono Rebellion in the 1730s, where hundreds of enslaved people rise up and kill a significant number of white colonists and start marching to Georgia with the idea that they're going to, join up with Spanish colonists in Florida. That had the effect, people don't always realize this, that had the effect of shutting down imports, slave trading imports into South Carolina for a decade. The South Carolina government said, we're not going to import any more black people because it's just too dangerous. Now, again, they did that for about 10 years and then went right back to it. But the anxieties about slave uprisings were there all the way through. And it really informs patriot decision-making when the Revolutionary War begins in 1775 and 1776.
I want to just jump ahead, and the audience who's listened to me over the years has heard me mention this before and even had this guest on. I just want to ask you, I don't know whether you're familiar with Professor Carl Bogus at Roger Williams University and his research on the hidden history of the Second Amendment. But his thesis is, and there it's documented, Patrick Henry said we need the Second Amendment because of the potential of these slave insurrections, which kind of explodes this fantasy that, we wanted guns, that the colonists wanted guns, or militias needed guns in case there would be another war or another uprising from the British. They actually put words on, no, these black folk that we're amongst are a threat to us. Then what he also brings up, he alludes to something very important that's in the American Revolution, ladies and gentlemen. That's why I hope people can watch it. There were some original lines in the Declaration of Independence, that list of grievances, where and I'm paraphrasing, but the inference would have been that Great Britain put the United States and the colonies at risk because of enslavement, almost as if Great Britain imposed the institution, and now y'all
Correct.
put us in danger and want us, the very institution you imposed on us might take us out. And right, am I right about that?
That's absolutely right. It becomes a sort of a favorite talking point among American patriots, and especially in the South, especially in Virginia and South Carolina. This was a favorite point to make Thomas Jefferson or somebody like Henry Laurens in South Carolina, who was a major importer of captive Africans. They decided that the way to explain their dependence on slavery was to describe it as a conspiracy of the British government and British merchants to force slaves on them, and then therefore leave them vulnerable so that they could not acquire their own political rights. Now, I mean, the absurdity of this is patently obvious. It's even what's especially absurd about it, if you know a little bit about the history of the British slave trade. In the previous 50, 60 years, British slaveholders in Virginia and South Carolina were complaining constantly that they couldn't get enough slaves delivered. And so the idea that this was a kind of a conspiracy of the British government to force it on them is obviously just not true. But what that points out is the way that in this period, a commitment to slavery starts looking like a kind of political vulnerability. All right. So when Jefferson's talking about slavery in North America is Britain's fault, what that shows is in part is they're recognizing that they've got something to explain. they've got a problem to explain in how they're talking about natural rights and liberties and are also but are still slaveholders. The conflicts that we obviously know about and talk about today, they were talking about that at the time too. That's not a new discovery. The inconsistency, the hypocrisy. That's something that was widely debated on both sides of the Atlantic. So the way that American slaveholders sometimes dealt with that is say, we didn't really want these black people here anyway. They were forced on us, and now we have this institution of slavery that we can't wait to abolish as soon as we're independent. None of which, of course, was true, but that was one of the things that they liked to say.
Yeah, yeah. Folks, historian Christopher Brown with us on enslavement in Ken Burns' American Revolution. There's some other topics we're going to cover too, because there was one major revelation that came to me, and I've shared this with people as I've encouraged them to see. And when I say it, they're like, "Really?" The documentary, they couldn't have said that, Mark. So no, they did. In fact, if I reached out to Ken, he's tied up, but I was going. I mean, the portrayal of enslavement is so much in this, and knowing PBS is in trouble. I was like, man, I don't know. This is, if MAGA watches this documentary and hears some
Well,
of the
they
things.
have. Well, some of them have, and they've decided that, and you can imagine the language and discourse around it. They've decided that it's a biased, inaccurate, fake, hoax, all the language, woke, series. I mean, I'd be happy to talk about, that way of casting it, but I just want to underscore this again. The documentary draws on the strongest, most deeply researched scholarship on the Revolutionary era that's been published basically since the bicentennial, since 1976. Slavery is not the only issue by far. There's a lot of military history. There's a lot of Native American history. There's a lot of social history. For the first time, women, both black and white, get their due. What it reflects is a deeper understanding of the revolution and the revolutionary period, but a deeper understanding that actually reflects the past rather than what might be some wishes about what the past had been.
That's right. That's right. Folks, Christopher Brown with us. I want to remind you that we are in our December pledge drive. So, folks, we have a goal of $500 in this hour here on Make It Plain, and we invite you to give. And to give right now, in the moments remaining, you can call 1-800-222-9739 to support WPFW. I just mentioned Ken Burns' American Revolution is on PBS. All of these, then this type of programming depends on our support. That's how we can remain free and not an influence. Let's be honest, folks. We see what's happening with other media and folks stepping in and asserting their authority and power. We know who we're talking about. So please support, please, ma'am, please, sir, give and give generously. 1-800-222-9739. You can also go to WPFWFM.org as well to give. And Cash App we have for you, $ WPFW FM. Please, ma'am, please, sir. We certainly hope that you can give and give now and represent your support for WPFW FM and all that it does for this community, not only Washington, D.C., but being on Pacific Radio around the country. And this is how we're able to have the likes of a Christopher Brown go further and deeper into this conversation. We saw him on American Revolution. Many of us did. If you haven't, you owe it to yourself to do so. But also we can talk to him now and don't even have to enroll in a class at Columbia. And we appreciate his generosity in sharing with us. One more time, folks, WPFWFM.org. Call right now, 800-222-9739, or Cash App WPFW FM. So your contribution can be logged in. We just got to make $500 in this next 26 minutes or so. So folks, please, man, please, sir, give. So I want to pick up on that, just as you mentioned, the way women are portrayed. And we saw women in combat
Yes.
in American Revolution. Let's start there. Speak to that first of all, and how women's roles are more centered, even though just like enslaved people, um, the phrase "all men are created equal" at that time also certainly didn't include women.
Yeah, no, that's right. That's right. I mean, well, we certainly know that there were women who essentially cross-dressed, who dressed as men,
Mm,
and, when they had the opportunity to do so until they were discovered, in some cases after they were discovered, were bearing arms and fighting. But even more so, it's important, this is a war that's taking place on a home front, in the 13 colonies. And both on the Patriot side and on the Loyalist side, there are women who are doing all of the work in supporting armies on both sides of the conflict, which, there's just so much logistical work, not only, in sort of, traditionally gendered, labor, as, in terms of cooking and cleaning, you know, growing crops. You have to remember when the men are away, the women's responsibilities in terms of caring for land, doing business, all of those things is much more profound, much more heavily, depended on. Um, so there's a tendency sometimes to think of military history and war history as men's history. And I think one of the things that the American Revolution documentary really makes clear is just how the various roles that women played during the conflict were fundamental to the success of the Continental Army, and also fundamental on the Loyalist side to sustaining the British Army, where, let's just remember, they were fighting a war thousands of miles away from home. So they had to really sustain themselves by drawing upon local resources. And the extent to which they were able to draw upon local resources often had a lot to do with whether the loyalist families would support them.
yeah.
So yeah, I mean, this is a whole social mobilization on both sides. It's not just professional armies in the field.
So you said you could speak to this. Tell us. I've seen some things, but not much. How is MAGA dealing? I don't know. I haven't even heard Trump address it directly
Yeah,
because
and
again,
I don't think, and I want to be, I've been involved in the production and the development of this project over several years. I was really fortunate to serve as an advisor in addition to a kind of a talking head. And so I've had some investment in, what the reaction would be. And so most of my take in this regard is more based on the sorts of things that turn up on, various chat groups or, social media. So I wouldn't say that there's a kind of an official response.
okay,
But one thing that I would just, my observation is that the sense that um, the story of slavery and the choices made by Black men and women, that the importance of Native American history and especially patriot ambitions for Native American land, that the role of women is acknowledged and taken seriously. That this is taken as, in some ways, a sign of well, what's often said about it is it's either woke or it's DEI or it's bad, like all these kind of buzz terms that to me are very empty and don't really mean anything. They're just kind of scare words. But they're also meant to try to delegitimize the project. I think that the folks who end up watching it end up being kind of surprised on the more MAGA side to see that that's actually not what the film is about at all. I mean, all of the
right.
you might say that all of the so-called founding fathers get their due. It's just that their lives, their choices are told in a much more complicated way. And so that those aspects of George Washington's career as a military leader, draw, are presented in ways that I think any audience member would end up coming away with, respect and admiration for him. At the same time, being aware of the fact that he, was not only a slaveholder, but also, really coveted Native American land and was eager to, displace it. So, we're dealing with human beings, not
Right.
statues, not, demigods. We're dealing with people who had virtues and vices like you do, like I do. And understanding the revolutionary period means looking at these folks and really seeing them for the rounded, complex people that they were. And it's a shame in some ways that in some political quarters, it feels necessary to pretend as if people were not people, but instead were, gods of some kinds. And I just don't understand how that helps us understand the past. I really don't.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. But well, I mean, as a historian, the way history is rewritten, and people are mythologized in that way because you mentioned General Washington, but also, I mean, we actually see him as human
Yeah,
for a change,
yeah.
and there were military mistakes, and
Yeah,
so
I mean, it's one of the great
everybody,
things, the sort of the lead military historian in this thing, Rick Atkinson, at one point says he was not a great strategist. I mean, almost lost the war at the outset in Brooklyn because he fails to defend one flank, and the Continental Army is almost crushed, in the very first months of the war after the Declaration of Independence. He makes all kinds of strategic mistakes.
yeah,
And I think what ends up being impressive about Washington is that he ends up prevailing, even though he's not always a great, strategist and military commander. So, that's the kind of insight that I think the team really wanted to try to convey, is that you've got people who are impressive in one ways and then deeply unimpressive in other ways. And that's any person that we admire in history. I think, that is in fact the true story of their life. If we're really willing to look at them clearly and honestly and deeply.
800-222-9739, folks, for your donations as well. Cash App, $ WPFWFM, also WPFWFM.org, as we are in our pledge drive. I'd like to, and again, Dr. Christopher Brown with us of Columbia University, who features prominently in Ken Burns' American Revolution. So this is what I wanted to say. This is my revelation.
Yeah.
And when I've said this to people like, Mark, you exaggerate. They didn't do that. I said, yes, they did. So this is it. And it has to do with indigenous people, with Native
Yeah.
Americans. Y'all, we've all been taught in school from birth, Tea Party, tax on tea, and you hear about the other taxes, but the Tea Party was it. That was the thing. What I got, and maybe I'm slow, but what I got that really, really stood out was the other main issue, and I think you alluded to it, Dr. Brown. Britain said, you know what? You all don't go any further west, you colonists. Y'all stay right where you are,
Yep.
and we're going to put a moratorium on you expanding into indigenous territory.
Yep.
It's almost as if that was the last straw. So, in other words, colonists don't want to be be a part of an empire,
Yeah.
but they want to build their own empire going west. And I mean, that, but when it is couched in that way, the way the documentary does it, that says, oh, that's a
And
paradox, is it
and
not?
they're not disguising their ambitions at all. They're not disguising, they foresaw and they wanted what in fact ended up happening, which is stretching the American empire, from the eastern seaboard all the way to the Pacific Ocean. This was hiding in plain sight. They called it the Continental Congress and the Continental Army for a reason,
Hello.
right? I mean, at the time that they were doing this, right, they resided in cities that hug the East Coast.
Yeah.
I-95,
Yeah.
Charleston,
Right.
to Richmond, to Baltimore, to Philadelphia, to New York, to Boston. That was the heart of the 13 colonies, and they were just starting to expand west into territory that I think of Western Virginia and central Pennsylvania and upstate New York. But the land hunger, the idea that, especially once the French had been driven out of what's present day Canada and a lot of the Midwest, because the French had claims in those parts of North America up until the 1760s. American colonists were like, that's going to be our land. And the British government took the view that if they start spreading westward, we're never going to be able to control them. Never mind the fact they're going to get into all kinds of conflicts with all the different Indian nations, on the other side of the Appalachians. And then we're going to have to send the army in to defend them. They're going to start wars, and then we're going to have to send in the military to protect them. So the idea was that we can govern these 13 colonies better if they stay close to the Atlantic Ocean. We can tax them better, we can govern them better, we can defend them better in time of war. But if they go out there, we're never going to be able to control them. So, no one's ever gotten very far by telling Americans what to do. So, part of what happens is that, in all of the states, but especially Connecticut, Pennsylvania, South Carolina, North Carolina, they're all looking at native land as the place in which to expand. And so that is one of the major grievances, is what's called the proclamation line, where the British government says, you will not settle west of the Appalachians. And, that is a major, major grievance. And it's one of the ways, one of the benefits of independence. And so just to conclude the point, Mark, I mean, one of the benefits that's extended to soldiers in the Continental Army is that if you serve a certain number of years, at the end of the war, you will receive Native American land. They're going to be paid. Soldiers are going to be paid in land that America does not yet own or possess. Right. So that's the and you're not you're not the only one who this will be new to. I mean, this is an aspect of the history of the revolution which was not well understood, as recently as 3 decades ago. The bicentennial, there was no discussion of the way that American land hunger and conflicts with Native Americans figure. There was discussion of slavery a little bit in 1976. I remember it. I was a kid, but we were starting to talk about Crispus Attucks and Backpage, but there was no discussion of Native Americans. So I think a lot of folks are going to be very surprised by that aspect of it, and to discover just how important it is for understanding the revolutionary period.
Ladies and gentlemen, Dr. Christopher Brown, who figures prominently in Ken Burns' American Revolution. I strongly encourage you to watch it. And folks, if you are, of course, enjoying this conversation, we ask you to give and give generously to WPFW. Go to WPFWFM.org, call 800-222-9739, or Cash App $WPFWFM. This type of programming, this type of conversation is very important. And that's one of the most valuable things about WPFW, is that this is an opportunity to learn, to bring the people like the Dr. Christopher Browns of the world, people of his caliber, to educate all of us. And we simply ask for your donation. As I've said to many of you, from the time I was 10 years old, I've been listening to WPFW since I was 10, just 10 years ago, as a matter of fact. And so we certainly hope that you will. I learned all about the blues from WPFW. And of course, WPFW was also a great source for educating, organizing, and mobilizing people in our movement, particularly DC statehood and whatnot. And so we need your support throughout this pledge drive. Please, ma'am, please, sir, at WPFWFM.org for your donations, or call 1-800-222-9739, Cash App $WPFW. FM. This is a very, very valuable conversation. Dr. Brown, you mentioned what the colonists, and that's another interesting aspect, that they were offering to pay people in land they didn't even have yet. There's that. But back to the British, they were promising emancipation for those of us who were enslaved.
That's right.
Do we have an idea just how broadly African Americans participated as loyalists with the British versus the numbers on the colonist side?
We really don't. I mean, there have been the best that historians can do on that subject in terms of how many Black people, escaped to British lines or served as, in loyalist corps in one way or another. Excuse me, the best we can do is to say it's numbered in the tens of thousands. So it was significant.
Yeah.
But there's no way, the kinds of records that would allow us to get a real head count just does not exist. But, the real point is that it was substantial. And there were far more who served on the British side than served on the North American side. That seems pretty clear. And it was a major political opportunity and a major rupture in slavery in North America, and to a degree in white supremacy, in the British government essentially saying, come serve the crown, and you will be recognized as a subject of the crown, and you will be free to live your within your means to live life as you choose at the end of the war. That really had not happened before in the British Empire. I mean, some historians have sometimes described it as the largest slave revolt in North American history. It was also, to a degree, the largest collective manumission. You might almost say a kind of emancipation as well. And again, I don't want to anybody get the impression that the British government was abolitionist or anti-slavery. This was strategic. But the fact of the matter is that the British war effort had the effect of making it possible for tens of thousands of Black people to free themselves over the course of the war. And it really has a dramatic impact on individual lives, and also a political vision. I mean, many Black people come out of the revolutionary period absolutely committed to the British crown, committed to the loyalist cause, seeing themselves as British subjects, because it was the British government that allowed them to become free, even if their ancestors had come over on British slave ships the generation before, right? So there are all kinds of ironies and paradoxes in this history. But yeah, the history of Black loyalists is something that not a lot of Americans know about, but it's one of the real consequences of this time period.
And for those who were quote unquote freed and left the country with other loyalists and went to, I think some went to Nova Scotia, others went elsewhere. But
Correct.
but then weren't they subject to other harms, including illness and disease? It didn't work out so
Absolutely.
well.
Absolutely. I mean, so I don't want to make this sound like too much of a triumphant story,
Right.
because in some ways there's this kind of moment of opportunity, and then there's just horrific tragedy as well. I mean, much of the folks who escaped with the Virginia governor, the Earl of Dunmore, and joined his effort to put down the Patriot Rebellion in Virginia. Most of those folks end up dying of smallpox, which in the 18th century just could wreak havoc on populations anywhere, but especially in a seaborne fleet that was having a hard time, finding a safe place to land. I mean, this happened also at the end of the war in Virginia. A lot of the Black folks who escaped to join Charles Cornwallis in his march through Virginia, a lot of those folks, died of smallpox. There's some untold number of people who escaped to British lines, who most of us believe were then resold into slavery. The promise of freedom was not actually preserved, and an unknown number were probably sold into the British Caribbean colonies. But some did acquire their freedom, and then left with the British, went to Canada, some went to England,
Right.
but then found themselves in situations where they were not in a situation where they could support themselves, where they were given the worst land or had the least opportunities. And some of those folks ended up migrating, under British patronage, kind of, to Sierra Leone. So, it's a really, the story of the Black diaspora out of the United States in the revolutionary period is one of the, is a really key aspect for Black history of the revolutionary period. It's not just like those who remain in North America, but a lot of Black people born in North America end up ending living the remainders of their lives in Canada or in England or Sierra Leone, or perhaps re-enslaved in the Caribbean or the Bahamas. So, there's a whole migration, somewhat voluntary, somewhat forced, out of America at the end of the Revolutionary War.
While Thomas Jefferson is composing the Declaration of Independence. Oh, let me do this first, folks. We've
Yeah.
got about 10 minutes left in the show. How about this? 10 of you call right now, pledge $50. 10 of you, $50. You all think you can do that for us here on WPFW? WPFWFM.org, or you can go there and pledge, or go to Cash App, $ WPFWFM, or simply call 800-222-9739. I need 10 of you, please, ma'am, please, sir, to call right now and pledge $50 in these next 10 minutes. $50 a minute here on WPFWFM.org, 800-222-9739, or Cash App, $ WPFWFM. Dr. Brown, Thomas Jefferson is writing the Declaration of Independence, and someone who's staying up with him all night and bringing him coffee is an enslaved. So there was moments of the document, y'all, are just poignant. You just kind of have to stop and say, wait a minute, I need to rewind that. Which we can do. We could do that with Civil War when that came out, but our TVs can rewind now.
Yep.
Did I hear that? And if I'm not mistaken, that enslaved person is related to him, correct?
Yeah.
This could be a reality show, y'all. So okay.
No, it's the half sister of his wife, who becomes the mother of Sally Hemings, who obviously has a long sexual relationship with Jefferson, who bears a number of his children. I don't think any of us should be brave or courageous enough to say exactly what was going on in that relationship. It was a sexual relationship, and it's not clear how much of a choice she had over it. But yeah, I mean, our history is a mixed history. It's a interracial history. It is a history in which in which white supremacy is a fundamental part of it, and yet at the same time, all the complexities of social relations, where people are living cheek by jowl and know each other intimately. There's all those dimensions of it as well. There's a boy named William Lee, who serves George Washington over the course of the war. He's enslaved to George Washington.
Right.
There are innumerable opportunities during the war where he almost certainly could have run away from George Washington. At the end of the war, at the end of Washington's life, Washington, leaves him with a pension of a kind. It's just, if you think about, again, all of the different ways that people relate to each other in our own world, where there are hierarchies and where there are power indifferences, and all the complex emotions, resentments that develop with that. I mean, slavery is another level, obviously, but it's again, I've said this before, but we're dealing with human beings. And we're dealing with human beings that have all the complexities and contradictions, and who don't always behave the way that we would want them to, including the people that you and I are descended from. Yeah. So, that's what it means to really look at this past in a serious way.
And speaking of George Washington, there was one of his enslaved people, one of the people he enslaved, who did run away and join the Loyalists, correct?
Yep.
And was he recaptured? Do I have that right?
Yeah, Harry Washington was. So here's a guy he was born in the Gambia River Valley, taken captured, sold into the Atlantic slave trade when he was a child or an adolescent. Comes to Washington and sold into Washington's estate. Washington puts him to work at hard labor in the Dismal Swamp, in the boundary between Virginia and North Carolina, some of the most, difficult work that one can do in the Chesapeake at this period of time. He runs away constantly, and Washington is like one of these folks who will just not submit. And when, Dunmore offers the opportunity to run away, Harry Washington is one of those people who escapes. He survives. He ends up going to New York and serving the loyalist, the loyalist cause,
Yeah.
and he's one of these folks who ends up going to Nova Scotia and Sierra Leone. So, there are stories like that all the way through the history.
Lastly, Dr. Brown, before we let you go, and we so appreciate this, folks, it's always a treasure to have people who spend this time with us. We can just watch him on a documentary, but I'm glad he's done this, and this definitely won't be the last time we speak.
I hope.
What's next for you? What you working on any projects right now?
Yeah, no, thank you for asking. So, I'm working on a variety of different projects. I teach, my teaching at Columbia. I do a lecture class on the Atlantic slave trade every year, which is, really important for, the undergraduate teaching that I do. I'm really interested in trying to understand how the Atlantic slave trade worked. And when I say how it worked, I mean how it worked at that point on the West African coast, where you had, elite Black men selling captured Black people to elite European men. And I'm really trying to understand in that moment where you've got elites on both sides doing business with poor people who have lost their freedom and who are impoverished. That's one of the things that I'm really trying to make sense of. I'm doing a lot around the 250th and the American Revolution. And, I'm pushing out some of this knowledge about, telling the history, of this period in a more complicated way that reflects the fact that, ours is a history which, is deeply rooted in the history of slavery, in the history of race, in the history of racial conflict, and also the history of hope, in the sense that, in the history of possibilities. So,
and just so you know, full disclosure, I've been a part of the reparations movement most of my life. Before, by the way, this MAGA influenced generation of those who are against Pan-Africanism and talk about foundational Black Americans. The fact of the matter is, as the documentary shows, and if you pointed out, a lot of us came through the Caribbean.
That's right.
So it's a worldwide. There's no such thing as just, we just popped up under Cabbage Patch here, y'all,
No.
as African Americans. So, my brother, what you shared and the research you're doing is important, and I think you've also made the case to serve as an expert witness in days to come when it comes to talking about reparations. But we
Happy
thank
to do so.
Yes, sir. We're thankful for you, and we want people to watch Ken Burns' American Revolution, folks. And Dr. Christopher Brown has been our very special guest. Dr. Brown, such a pleasure to meet you, and we'll definitely be back in touch, man. Okay.
I really enjoyed it. Really appreciate it. Thank you for the invitation, the opportunity. Be good, everybody.
All right, thank you, man. Folks, in the moments remaining that we have, we want to invite people to give. Let's do a quick rapid round. We appreciate the donations we've already received. And look, oh goodness, our goal was $500, and we just got 50 more. Where's that last $50, y'all?
Katia's on with you.
Katia, you there? Go right ahead, Katia. God bless you. Welcome.
God bless you, Mark. Thank you.
Hey, say hi to Dr. Brown, Katia. Wasn't he great?
He was wonderful, but we can't tell people to watch anything. But we love it that people are excited about the American Revolution by Ken Burns. That's fantastic, and so we want you to take that with you. But we want you to give something first, which is that last 50. In fact, if someone gives 100, 200, 500 more dollars, we can exceed the goal. Mark has done such a splendid job since he has rejoined WPFW. Let us celebrate him this morning. 800-222-9739 or WPFWFM.org. I am speaking fast because we want to make this goal $50 to go before the top of the hour, and Elliot Gross comes your way with the best blues in town. 800-222-9739 or WPFWFM.org are the ways to connect. You can also use Cash App, $ WPFWFM. If you're on your phone, like I often am, just hop on over to your Cash App. It's quick and easy, less than 30 seconds, and we will have made the goal. $50 to go, you all. Make it plain. It's so worth it. And having the esteemed Reverend Dr. Mark Thompson with us as part of back with us, we should say, as part of the WPFW family is really incredible. So let's celebrate Mark. Let's celebrate Jazz and Justice. Let's celebrate having a space for Make It Plain here on WPFW. $50 to go, 800-222-9739 or WPFWFM.org. Mark, thank you for letting me join you.
Thank you to our program director, Tia Stitt. Once again, thanks to Dr. Christopher Brown. If all minds are clear, hearts and minds are clear, it has been made plain.